Hello, my friend. It's Gina. Thank you for continuing the long journey in the effort to find justice for Elizabeth. This is an account that's based on a true story, one that, as of this recording, remains ongoing. Welcome back to Lost Sister, A Discarded Woman, Episode 15. Content warning: this and future episodes contain sensitive topics and may cause distress to some listeners. Hearing disturbing actions of oppression, manipulation, and abuse can bring up painful memories, personal struggles, and trauma for many. Narrator's note: the names have been changed and places are purposefully arbitrary to protect the privacy of those involved. This podcast is our way of telling Catherine and Elizabeth's story so that others can be aware of potential future issues. The central figures in our story include Catherine, her sister Elizabeth, Elizabeth's husband Walter, and Walter's granddaughter Darcy. A quick recap of episode 14. There's a frequent question that's asked of many survivors of abuse. Why did you stay in an abusive relationship? It implies that the victim is to blame for allowing the abuse in the first place. Instead, why isn't it framed more like this? Why do people abuse the person they claim to love? Abuse is usually imperceptible at first, just a gradual shift in behavior. There's a metaphor that describes how abuse happens quite well. If you put a frog in a pot of water, then ever so slowly increase the heat a degree or two at a time, the frog doesn't notice the difference in temperature because it adapts to the long, slow change until it's eventually boiled to death. Leaving a bad relationship is a process. Research shows that it can take about 7 attempts before a survivor permanently leaves an abusive partner. We know that Elizabeth left Walter at least 3 times. Once for over a year, she had made a new life for herself, was happy for the first time as an adult, until he found her and eventually manipulated and coerced until she came back to him. Now, let's continue our story by diving right in. The intent of this episode is to better familiarize ourselves with several forms of abuse, how to spot it, what to say, and some possible avenues to get out of a bad situation. Abusers can be a partner, a relative, a family member, a classmate, a care provider, a neighbor, or a professional, a teacher, a coach, an instructor, an employer, manager, coworker. So just about anyone in our day-to-day lives. Sidebar: neither the Lost Sister podcast team nor myself are trained counselors, just concerned people who want to share the resources and research we've collected, just in order to offer our listeners information. We hope to shed some light on abuse overall and maybe, just maybe, help someone in the process. So, how can we spot abuse? Well, first, let's talk about recognizing abuse in others. Possibly the most blatant indicators of abuse are physical evidence of violence, like visible bruises or cuts, broken bones, damage to the home or property, signs of cruelty to animals or children, signs that are not so easy to spot, but are very strong indicators within someone experiencing abuse include: is there a sudden change in mood or personality? Do they seem to be depressed or in a perpetual bad mood recently? Do they seem to be afraid, avoiding, or over-anxious around a particularly person or place? Have they stopped taking prescribed medications? Have you noticed changes in conversations or their normal visitations? Do they seem withdrawn, too eager to do everything they're asked to do? Are there suddenly compulsive behaviors? Are they not able to do the things they used to do? Do they appear to not be able to concentrate or focus? An even tougher perspective, but very necessary. How about recognizing abuse in ourselves? I encourage you to listen fully to these questions and to be honest with yourself. Nobody else needs to know. Do you feel isolated from your friends and family that is not of your own choosing? Have you started feeling low self-esteem since you've become involved with this person? Have you experienced verbal abuse or humiliation, whether in private or in front of others? And if so, were you able to freely talk through the situation with this person? Do you feel free to visit, talk to, or talk about your coworkers, friends, and family? Are you questioned about who you're talking to at work or anywhere else? Have there been verbal threats to your well-being or to the children, pets, or other family members, even if it's only implied? Do you feel monitored, controlled, or manipulated? Are you comfortable wearing anything you want to wear? Are you restricted to money, personal items, food, your phone or computer access? Do you have overwhelming anxiety about being around this person? Is there a person in your life who is extremely jealous, even though they tell you that it's because they love you so much? Is there someone holding you to unrealistic expectations? Does this person never take responsibility for their own behavior and continuously blames others when things go wrong in their life, especially you? Are you told you're crazy, stupid, too fat, too skinny, unattractive, that there is no one who would ever want or love you? Do you believe that any abuse you've received is your own fault, even if you know it's not? Is there a lack of trust or respect in your relationship? According to the Better Up website, there are red flags, warning signs, if you will, in a toxic relationship that indicate unhealthy or manipulative behavior. Could be controlling actions, lack of respect, love bombing, which is when one person showers another person with excessive attention and affection. This can happen at any time in a relationship, but particularly after an incident, an outburst or violence. But love bombings is more likely to happen at the beginning of a new relationship. These could be subtle to start, but become more problematic over time, potentially leading to toxic dynamics. When you encounter relationship red flags, it's a good time to pause and reflect on the relationship itself. Often, toxic behavior creeps up on us, especially in moments of weakness. If we're not prepared to face it head on, it can take control of our lives. To protect ourselves and those around us, it's suggested to cultivate self-awareness around red flags that helps us avoid them altogether. Abuse is when someone misuses their control or power over another person, causing harm or distress. The abuser could be in a close relationship with anyone at risk, could be someone they depend on and trust. Identifying adult abuse isn't always easy. Many people will do anything to hide the abuse and protect their abuser. It's humiliating and embarrassing to admit. But this was Elizabeth's entire life with Walter, an intelligent, well-read, and respected doctor, a loving and caring daughter and sister, and yet abused, controlled, and manipulated by a spouse for decades. And maybe that's hard for you to wrap your head around, but it's real, my friend. It's so very real for way too many people. Honestly, I don't believe we can repeat this often enough. Whether you have experienced any or all of these behaviors, please know that most of us have, to some extent, experienced this. And if you haven't, well, you are one lucky so-and-so. Here are the basics of verbal, emotional abuse. It's to bully, to inflict physical or emotional harm upon another person, to attack, humiliate, and ridicule, to criticize harshly, to mistreat in private and or in public, and to scare, intimidate, slamming doors, throwing things, destroying things, or harming pets. Elizabeth suffered at the hands of Walter throughout their marriage, but also over the last few years by Darcy. Both Walter and Darcy belittled, isolated, and controlled Elizabeth. Then Darcy manages to put a cherry on the top by withholding Elizabeth's prescribed medications. Of course, we've all heard of narcissistic personality disorder. It is a mental condition, though. Self-obsession and misplaced sense of importance. Narcissists believe the world revolves around them. Turmoil and chaos for anyone who threatens their belief. It can be dangerous to live with a narcissist, dealing with the highs and lows of their emotions, cycles of abuse, constant criticism, and invalidation can cause serious emotional trauma. Now, we all know I'm no expert, but at the very least, after all of the research I've done, my personal belief is that both Darcy and Walter could be considered narcissists. At the very least, they do seem to harbor narcissistic tendencies, possibly even sociopathic, due to their calculating and the distinct disregard for the welfare of others. Neither appear to have any empathy for Elizabeth and seem unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings or needs of others, which Darcy in particular often overstates how much she loves Elizabeth, just as Walter professed to love Elizabeth at the beginning of their relationship too. Now, financial abuse falls more in line with this, as in to use, to take unfair advantage of, to exploit for personal gain, to leverage, manipulate, to fleece. Walter was guilty of financial abuse to Elizabeth by controlling all of her assets, even though Elizabeth was the sole provider in the household for the majority of their relationship. She had no say in any purchases, from her own clothing to the car she drove, the furniture in their house, and where they lived. Financial abuse happens when someone tries to steal or defraud someone of their finances, which includes embezzlement, withholding pensions or benefits, exerting pressure around wills, property, or inheritance. Signs include suddenly finding difficulty with their finances, not paying bills, or just having normal home comforts. They become protective of money and the things they own. And even beyond the grave, that SOB Walter, whether he was mentally stable enough to make it happen himself, but most certainly he had Darcy's help, that Walter, by removing Elizabeth from his will, he put Elizabeth in financial jeopardy. And as we've evidenced, we know that Darcy continues to do it to this very day. So now, what do you do if you suspect abuse? Number one, if you or another person are in immediate, life-threatening danger, call 911. If the danger isn't imminent, but you do suspect that abuse has occurred or is occurring, please tell someone. If it's child abuse, contact Child Protective Services. If it's an elder, contact the local Adult Protective Services or the police if they are in physical danger. Now, we list several contacts at the end of each podcast, as well as a pinned info and contacts list on our Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman podcast Facebook page. So, what about everybody else in between? What should we do if someone tells you they've experienced violence? First, listen. Don't interrupt or judge. Give them the time to share their story on their own terms. Believe them. It's important. Otherwise, they could retreat entirely. Affirm to them that they're being so brave to say the words out loud. Emphasize that they are not to blame. And keep the conversation confidential if they ask you to. Things that you could say. What happened is not okay. It's not your fault. I'm glad you told me. Do you feel safe? I'm here for you. How can I help you? Or what can I do for you? Or what can I do with you? If you want, I'll help you make a safety plan. I'm no specialist, but I'll help find contacts for a support service. And in contrast, here's a few don'ts. Don't ask for details. Don't try to fix the situation for them. Don't give advice. Don't tell them what to do. Don't criticize the victim or the perpetrator. Above all, unless you are a trained counselor, please don't try to counsel. Even with all of these resources, how do we actually protect ourselves and our loved ones? Well, we can help end the culture of silence around domestic violence. We can educate ourselves, speak out against victim blaming and discrimination to end the stigma surrounding domestic violence. We can also contact policymakers about the importance of funding for services for people affected by domestic violence. Advocate for safe and affordable housing. Support youth programs that foster healthy growth and resilience. Be a role model with respect and equality in your own relationships to change beliefs and behaviors that perpetuate domestic violence. And you can tell your own story of abuse, how it happened, and how you got out. We're only scratching the surface of domestic violence, folks. The intent of this podcast is to give you food for thought, at least. Things to be aware of, and some potential steps that could be taken. And of course, if we could help one person, then it's well worth the time and energy to share. You know, it makes me really sad to wonder if something like this podcast had been available 50 or 60 years ago. Who knows? Maybe Elizabeth would have been one of our listeners, just like you. Maybe she could have found the strength to leave Walter, to have given him a swift kick in the ass and say bye-bye long, long ago. And you know what's a real kick in the ass? Finding out that some law firms, attorneys that are less than honest, giving poor information and advice and taking advantage of the system. So with that in mind, I hope you join us for episode 16, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman, the title, Attorneys, the Good, the Bad, and the Indifferent. Abuse in all forms is an equal opportunity instrument of control, regardless of age, gender, IQ, education, or socioeconomic status. Whatever your age, for your own sake and for those who care about you, please establish a living will. Keep it somewhere your chosen caretakers can access it. And if you don't have your assets in order, make plans right now to do so. Talk to an attorney and or an investment institution you trust and make it happen before it's too late. The terms elder abuse, elder neglect, and elder fraud are relatively new. In general, elder abuse is a term referring to any knowing, intentional, or neglectful act by a caregiver or any other person that causes harm or serious risk of harm to a vulnerable elderly person. Legislators in all 50 states have passed some form of elder abuse prevention laws. A good place to start for more information is the website justice.gov/elderjustice. And if you suspect elder abuse, there is help. The National Elder Fraud Hotline is 1-833-FRAUD-11. That's 833-372-8311. The National Adult Protective Services Association, or NAPA, can get help in your area. Their website is napsa-now.org. A fantastic resource is the National Center on Elder Abuse website, ncea.acl.gov. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 800-799-7233. These links and phone numbers are also located on the Lost Sister webpage, lostsister.buzzsprout.com. Also follow our Facebook page, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. By gaining a wider audience, we hope to bring attention to not only Elizabeth and Catherine's story, but to shine an enormous light on all domestic abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and elder fraud. We are still hoping one of our listeners knows of someone who could help hold that spotlight, someone with a wider audience, especially in the media. We truly believe that there's so much more that must be done to protect the vulnerable in our society. Our hope is by sharing Elizabeth and Catherine's story that it might help others to avoid the same happening to them or someone they love. Thank you.